Homeowners associations, the ones that you pay to mow the lawns and shovel the snow, are being hit hard by the housing crisis. Homeowners struggling to pay their mortgages are letting HOA fees slide. So now the HOA is fighting back and foreclosing.
I was kind of dumbfounded.
Tony Goodman lost his job and is now losing his home, not to his mortgage lender, but to his San Antonio, Texas Homeowners Association.
I owed the Homeowners Association very little money in comparison to what I owed my mortgage company.
Goodman owed his HOA $769 and tried to set up a repayment plan. But in April, his HOA, Lookout Canyon Creek, filed foreclosure and then bought the house at auction for just over $2,000.
All you're doing is throwing dirt on top of me while I'm trying to climb out of the hole.
In Bexar County, Texas alone, HOA foreclosures were up 78% from 2008 to 2009. Sales records for July show big bank foreclosures generally sell for around the property's assessed value. But in HOA foreclosures, they take title for pennies on the dollar. A $148,000 home for $1,800. A $144,000 home for $1,600.
A lot of people do not understand the fact that they can lose their home by simply not paying a few hundred or a few $1,000s in association fees.
Florida attorney Bob Tankel represents HOAs in foreclosure actions. His business is booming.
The associations and their boards of directors have a duty to the people who pay, and the duty is to collect the assessments.
Goodman is in a race to repay his HOA plus attorney's fees. Texas has a 180-day redemption period on foreclosures.
Will I get my home back? I wish I could answer that.
34 states allow for judicial foreclosures by HOAs, although the rules vary from state to state. In some cases, borrowers are working on loan modifications with their banks when the HOAs swoop in and beat them to it, foreclosing on the property. Diana Olick, CNBC, Washington.
Let's delve into this further. Do homeowner associations have the right to foreclose on homeowners? Well, joining us is Tom Skiba, CEO of the Community Associations Institute, and Bill Davis, an attorney from Davis & Associates. Tom, what do you think?
Well, I think associations need to have that tool in their toolbox to collect amounts that are due them, but that's a tool that should be the tool of last resort.
It should be a tool of last resort, indeed. As Diana was just explaining to us, sometimes you have the situation where you've got borrowers in the middle of a loan workout, and yet the Homeowners Association comes in and perhaps undermines that effort by feeling they've got their dues, they're going to foreclose. Is that undermining the entire housing recovery bill?
Well, I don't think so, because the number of homeowner association foreclosures pales in comparison to the number of bank foreclosures that are going on. We estimate it would be less than 0.5% of the total, and in most cases, an association that begins foreclosure proceedings stops right there. They very rarely go to actual sale. Usually the threat of the foreclosure is sufficient to get the homeowner and the association speaking together so that they can resolve the past due amounts and figure out a way to work themselves out of that problem.
Bill, do you have a thought on this?
Yes, I do. In my opinion, the foreclosure process is usually used to shake down the homeowners for the benefit of the HOA vendors. These are not associations of people. These are HOA corporations. They should be recognized as such. They are not groups of homeowners. And what typically happens is the vendors of the association, mainly the management companies and the HOA attorneys, very quickly insert themselves in this debt creation and collection process and use the threat of foreclosure primarily to extort other monies from the homeowners. The money is not I heard a comparison with the banks, but you have to understand the banks, you're dealing with purchase money of the home. The HOA did not contribute money to purchase the home. The question about where that money is going, who it's being used for, that's a whole other issue, but allowing the HOA vendors to ramp up these alleged debts and threaten homeowners with foreclosure needs to be stopped.
Okay, so perhaps, Bill, you're suggesting that they have too much power and they want even more power, and yet you could argue, yes, I would imagine, that there is a point at which you've got so many delinquencies in a certain street or a certain community that it starts to bring the whole community's value down, and the HOA perhaps wants to try to protect that.
Well, that's exactly right, Amanda. In fact, these aren't created debts. When someone purchases a home in an association, they sign a contract that obligates them to pay an assessment on a periodic basis, monthly, quarterly, annually, whatever it may be. So they have an obligation. Secondly, there's an equity issue here. And yes, there needs to be a way to find an equitable solution with someone who is delinquent on their association assessments. But keep in mind, for everyone who is delinquent, they are essentially reaching into the pockets of all their fellow homeowners in that association and making them pay their bills. Associations typically don't budget excess reserves in the course of a year. So if there's a half $500,000 budget and a bunch of people aren't paying, the rest of the neighbors who are paying are going to pick up that slack. And finally, and this you alluded to this, the Federal Housing Administration has recently passed rules that require mortgage underwriting to have a maximum delinquency rate of 15%. So if a board in an association were to allow the delinquency rate to exceed 15% in a community, no one in that community would be able to obtain a mortgage.
Okay, thank you very much for bringing both sides of the coin.
Well, I'd like to point out that's not entirely accurate, because I don't want to confuse condominium-type associations with single-family HOA corporation associations. These are two different and distinct types of associations, and they have different issues. But a condo is only a statutory form of ownership, but homes burdened by HOAs, there was a recognized property right long before HOAs ever came into existence.
Tom and Bill.
They're very different. They should not be confused.
I apologize for cutting you off, but we've run out of time. But Tom and Bill, thank you very much for your thoughts today on the show.